I can still clearly remember the first time I played a Nintendo Entertainment System. The first time I held its totally unique rectangular controller with no joystick. I was 11 or 12. I was at Crossroads Mall late at night. They were about to close by myself. So I had split up from my parents, and there was, I don't even think it was there very long. There was a small electronics store on the second level, the back corner, and on a metal shelf in there, they had a little television and a Nintendo Entertainment System with Super Mario Brothers on it. And I was blown away. So let me step back just a little bit before we move on. You hear a lot about the video game crash of 1983. As someone who lived through it, I talk about it like it's the Great Depression or something, but I didn't really see it. I didn't feel it. It didn't affect me. I think when people talk about the video game crash, in Japan they call it the Atari shock. I think that's a bit better of a name for it, but there was a glut of home consoles. ColecoVision, Odyssey, Atari 2600. The market was just flooded, and honestly, most of this stuff was not very good. I had friends on my block, they all had Ataris and I didn't have one. You might psychoanalyze me and say that that was part of the reason why video games became such a big deal for me, why I have participated in pretty much everything that happened since then, but I kind of missed out on the Atari 2600 era. I was the kid who annoyed the other kids because every time I was at their house, I wanted to play their Atari and they were already bored with it. I remember a kid who lived 2 doors down, he got Pac-Man when it came out for the Atari. Pac-Man in the arcades was everything at that point. Well, we loaded the thing up. It was nothing like the arcade. The screen was blue. Pac-Man didn't even change the direction he was facing when you moved up and down. I mean, far from being arcade perfect, the Atari couldn't even render a dot. The dots in Pac-Man are not arcade perfect on the Atari 2600. We joked that they looked like candy bars or gold bricks or something that he was eating instead. It was not good. So the fact that those failed was not much of a surprise. But like I said, I was an elementary school student and I didn't notice. I was busy with my Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 didn't miss a beat. Home computers filled that gap. I was still buying and playing video games for my Commodore 64 all through the dark ages of the video game crash. So the video game crash was really about consoles, arcades and computers doing great the whole time. But then in '85, quietly, this Nintendo Entertainment System came out, and it was something different. It didn't look like the other ones. It looked a little more like a VCR. You slotted them in there. The controller was different, as I said. Joysticks are really a terrible idea. You're basically giving the user a lever to smash your electronics with. The plus pad was a brilliant invention. But back to that night, all alone in this store at Crossroads Mall, playing Super Mario Brothers. I had played Super Mario Brothers at an arcade machine at this restaurant we had in town called Big Ed's. It was a hamburger joint. Like I said in a previous video, every restaurant and convenience store had at least a couple arcade machines. Big Ed's had 8 or 10. So I loved playing Super Mario Brothers there. It was a new kind of a game. Running along, stomping things, jumping. It was brilliant. But when I played Super Mario Brothers on that NES at the mall that night, I was shocked. This looked exactly like the arcade game that I loved. Well, I didn't even think about this until recently, but it wasn't that Super Mario Brothers was arcade perfect, which was a term that didn't even exist at the time. Super Mario Brothers that I'd played at the arcade was a Nintendo in an arcade machine. Nintendo had released Super Mario Brothers in Japan way before that. We saw it first as an arcade machine, then in a home console. So there was kind of a flip. The arcade version, incidentally, does have some differences. Fewer one-ups, narrower platforms. Some stages are way more difficult than they are at home because it's an arcade machine. They're trying to get your quarters. Anyway, so I was blown away. I can play this arcade Super Mario Brothers game at home. I've got to have one of these, and I begged my parents for it. A good friend of mine got the deluxe set of the NES. It came with Rob, the Zapper, 2 controllers, Gyromite, and Duck Hunt. I played that at his house quite a bit. We almost never, I don't really remember ever even using Rob correctly. I would just pull up the test screen. Rob's eyes would see the flashes of patterns from the TV screen, and they would interpret what you wanted him to do. You were supposed to make him spin tops that he would lay on top of this gadget that would depress the button on the controller, which in the game Gyromite would move either these blue or orange pipes up or down so that you could move the professor through using the other controller that you're holding through the stages. I played all the way through Gyromite, but I did not use the robot. I just used my other hand and moved the pipes as I needed to solve the puzzle so that I could get through. I love the music in Gyromite. In fact, I made a remix of it about 18 years ago. For a home console, the Nintendo was the first to do that, to have actual music. It took video game developers a while to move away from this arcade mentality. The first generation of NES games didn't really have music any different than Donkey Kong. You know, there'll be a little tune at the beginning of the stage, maybe a little music while the character's walking, music when you die, music when you pass the stage, that sort of thing. And scores, and starting over when you run out of lives. Those kinds of concepts that are great for arcade games because, once again, you're trying to convince the person to put in more quarters, to try and beat their high score, to get the top of that leaderboard. In a home console, that doesn't make as much sense. You've convinced the person to buy the game. You don't have to aggravate them as they play it. They don't have anyone to compete against except for siblings and family members for the score. So gradually, the idea of how a home video game should be changed for the better. So when my birthday rolled around the next summer, my parents got me the Control Deck, which is one I wanted. It came with Super Mario Brothers and 2 controllers. There was an action pack later that came with the Zapper and the Mario and Duck Hunt combo cartridge, but at the time, that was not how it was. You either got the deluxe set or you got the Control Deck. Well, just a day or 2 after my birthday, we had to go on a trip. So I took the NES with me, and on our way up through Oklahoma City on the trip, we stopped at Toys R Us. There's a lot of repeating patterns in these stories, as you'll notice if you've watched any of the other videos. I spent money I had saved and bought Excite Bike because I'd also played it at the arcade, also not knowing that that was just NES hardware in the arcade machine. But to me, another arcade perfect Nintendo title. You guys have done it. So I remember we went through Colorado Springs. I spent the night with an old friend of mine who had moved away, and we played Super Mario and Excite Bike, and we went on up to Bozeman, Montana. My grandparents and my uncle were there, and I remember we played Super Mario and Excite Bike together, my uncle and I did, on that trip. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but things were very different before the internet. There were no magazines about the Nintendo or any games available for it at this point. But it was getting really popular around 1987 when I was in junior high. It was really blowing up. I had a friend at school. He had a subscription to Nintendo Fun Club News. He brought it to class, he showed it to me, and I just poured over the thing. It was like a trifold pamphlet almost, 3-color printing, mostly text. It told us how we could get to the Minus World in Super Mario Brothers and other strange tricks like that we were so excited to go home and try out. But one issue talked about these 2 new games that were going to be coming out, Metroid and Kid Icarus. And it said that they were going to be password packs, that you could unlock a password so that you could continue playing the game later on from where you left off. Before this, there were games like Mega Man and Castlevania that I loved, and they were very difficult. But in order to finish them, I had to leave my Nintendo on for a week, just with the game paused. I'd pause it, go to bed, go to school, come home, try again. I remember specifically on Castlevania, leaving it paused for almost a week, trying to beat Dracula at the end of the game. I eventually gave up, never did beat him. I just had to turn it off because I wanted to play something else. Now Mega Man, I finally did complete, and I was really proud of that. But the first Mega Man had no password. Castlevania, no passwords. Well, I don't remember exactly how I got so worked up about Metroid coming out. I believe it was probably, apart from the paragraph in Nintendo Fun Club News about the Mother Brain and the space pirates and this cybernetic warrior who was adventuring on this planet to save the universe, there were 1 or 2 screenshots in the Sears wish list catalog that came out for Christmas that year. With no internet and no gaming magazines, that was all I had. It was a picture of Samus standing in a room with a Chozo statue, probably the room where you get the long beam. And I just analyzed that and imagined what this whole game would be like from that screenshot. So I feel like it was in late October, Kid Icarus and Metroid came out on the same day. They were in a silver box. They were the very first password packs. Here's Metroid. It's got the silver label. It says Adventure Series down here. They really weren't good with their box art. It's pixelated graphics that actually somehow look worse than the game, but regardless. I bought Kid Icarus and Metroid together that day. I feel like they were between 25 and 30 bucks each. Nintendo games were still pretty cheap at that point. I played a little of each. I got stuck on Metroid because I could not figure out how to get through these red doors. I tried hitting them with a missile. Nothing happened. I wasn't about to waste my missiles. So I went to Kid Icarus, probably played it more than I did Metroid. One day I was just looking through the Metroid manual and I noticed on a little sidebar on one page with the map of a portion of the game, it explained that red doors had to be hit with 5 missiles. After that, you couldn't stop me. I was playing that game like crazy, finding my way around through the mazes. And again, without the internet, I had a buddy at school, he was playing it too. We would pass each other in the hallway between classes and trade notes on how far we'd gotten, things we'd found. And I got to the fire area. And finally I remember getting to tell him I found the first mini-boss Kraid and I beat him. It was just such a sense of discovery that the internet has really taken away. I don't mean to sound like an old man. Well, I know I sound like an old man, but unless you were there then, it's a sensation that you can't really grasp, I don't think. Because we can just find out anything we need to know immediately now. So the whole game felt like I was the first person in the world discovering this stuff. When I finally beat Metroid and Samus revealed herself to be a woman, that was a big shock. The whole instruction manual of the original Metroid keeps up the pretense that this is a guy. Starting again, she's not got her armor on. She's wearing like a leotard. That blew my mind. That I could play through again and the character would be different, that I wouldn't have to pick up all the items. See, this was a whole new attitude about games. In Metroid, when you die, you just show up at the nearest elevator that you visited. You don't have to start over from the very beginning. You're not trying to get a high score. You're trying to explore an adventure. And that just changed everything for video games. Oh man, I knew this was going to happen. I've been talking too long. I'm going to end it right there, and then I'll have a part 2 later. Thanks for watching.